Hello and welcome back to a very, very special episode of Boys Gone Wild. I've got my first guest in the history of the podcast. It's my friend and comedian Samuel Ely.
Hey, Sam Ely.
How are you doing, Sam?
Long time watcher, first time.
You don't watch. I bet you don't watch that much.
I've seen at least 4.
That's those numbers. I'm doing them daily, babe. So those aren't great numbers. But we're here for a very special reason. I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't get Sam on just for his comedic chat or anything. This is more important than that. We're here to discuss. This is a big risk for me career-wise, trying to get this out, because I've actually managed to build up quite a good following on this podcast, and I really think us trying to share this with the world, it really could backfire. I'm ready to lose at least 20 subscribers after this episode goes out. But I've accepted that because this needs to be documented, and I want to do it now before we forget it or it gets lost. You know, what if both of us? What if we? Yeah. So like, if we both died, because I don't like being in the same room as you, because if we both died in a freak accident, then this system would die with us. So yeah, this is a special episode that I've got my friend Sam on to discuss the Pedo, Cuck, Stinky trifecta, which is, would you describe as a theorem, a sociological theorem?
It's difficult. It evolved so naturally that having to lay it out in scientific terms like this is, pretty challenging.
Because to us it's clear, but it's about trying to spread it to the world. And remember, this is not really a podcast. This is a piece of historical documentation.
It's a modern and unique method of social categorization, with a sort of limitless use. Really.
Sure. So how did we come up with this system? It was in Edinburgh, 2019.
Yeah.
We were doing a split bill, and we basically went to see loads of shows together and had many little conversations before the show started. And I think slowly from there, we started categorizing comedians at first into these sort of 3 categories of Pedo, Cuck, Stinky. Yeah?
Yeah, I can't remember where it first came from. Originally, we just had Pedo and Cuck, and we realised something was missing.
On a spectrum. It was a Pedo, Cuck was sort of on a spectrum. Do you want to roughly try and explain the 3 categories of person? So if you're watching this, you are inescapably in these 3 categories. Even if you think this is the dumbest thing you've ever heard of, you are inescapably either a Pedo, Cuck, or Stinky, which is part of the magic of the theorem. Do you want to have an attempt to try and explain the 3 categories, or do you think it's best done through examples?
I'll give a brief go. It's hard to. I don't feel like we've ever come up with solid definitions for it, because there's something quite sort of ethereal about them.
For sure,
they don't fit neatly into things. You kind of just have to be exposed to it enough.
Sam's going to try and explain some of the characteristics of people in these 3 categories. But if you are listening to this, if you're still listening and haven't switched off, this is really going to separate the true fans from the fake fans. I'm like taking my fans down. If I'm driving a train, I've flipped them off the tracks and I'm going down a dirt road. But if you're thinking when Sam's explaining these categories, so that's what they are, you're probably wrong. So really don't try and pin down what these categories are by just some general categories or characteristics. And also I know it's hard, trying to forget the original meanings of Pedo, Cuck, and Stinky. They're semi-relevant, but also not. Take it away, Sam.
Okay, so Pedo and Cuck exist on a kind of linear scale. With 2 ends. Anyone can kind of exist anywhere on either end of the scale.
We all do. We all do. Yeah.
We all do. Horatio, for example, is a pedo, and I'm a cuck.
I'm quite a massive pedo, actually.
Horatio is a huge pedo.
And you're a huge cuck.
Traditionally quite a big cuck, although Horatio does think I'm a bit of a pedo on the inside. But this is sort of
a little bit, but we'll get into that.
Don't
confuse them
out.
Yeah. So
pedo. The way I like to think of pedo is kind of inside of yourself. There being a kind of aggression is too strong a word, but some amount of confidence, of arrogance, of
you take on the world as opposed to receive it.
Yeah. There's I feel like there's a word that's escaping me, but pedos are more likely to be loud, to be confident, to really feel like they deserve their own existence. There's a self-assuredness in their soul. I'd say it's a defining characteristic of being a pedo.
But it's also a worldview that it kind of can feed into, because there's some people who have quite cucky politics but go about it with quite a pedo way. So that it's like you can use pedo characteristics with your personality to express cuck values. So can you move on to what a cuck is, which is almost the other side?
Yeah. So a cuck is pedo, and cuck is the simplest way to start. A cuck is basically the opposite of a pedo.
Cuck's the only one which makes sense. The cuck's the only one that the category stays by its original meaning. So
pedo has nothing to do with being a paedophile. As we'll get onto, most paedophiles are in fact cucks or stinky. Very confusing, I know. But,
normally stinky cucks, but yeah, go on.
Normally stinky cucks, yeah. So a cuck speaks to a certain vulnerability, a certain sensitivity, a certain sense of empathy within you. It's someone who doesn't take on the world with the kind of bombast that a pedo would. It's gentler, meeker outlook on the world.
Which I would argue a cuck at its best is kind and empathetic, and a cuck at its worst is snide and cowardly.
Yes.
But then there's a third category which will have to be brought in for people who... Because there's pedos and cucks, and we thought that was all that existed in the world.
Stinky, if you imagine cuck and pedo as a kind of linear, two-dimensional, one-dimensional scale, Stinky is kind of an extra dimension. It's the y-axis of the pedo-cuck stinky trifecta. So, Stinky has no relation to being pedo or a cuck. You can be a very stinky pedo or an incredibly stinky cuck. Equally, you could be a cuck with no stink whatsoever.
None.
Which does make it hard for people new to the system.
And you're probably thinking right now, oh, I know someone who smells, he's probably stinky. Stinkiness is not about how you smell, but if you consistently smell awful, you're probably stinky.
I'd say, arguably coincidentally, actually stinking disgusting is a somewhat common trait of really stinky people. So what stinky is, in its essence, I think, is an outsider status, not quite fitting in, being on sort of the outskirts of society somehow. Became a way of describing the kind of odd, scuttling, bearded comedians you'd see on the streets of Edinburgh in the middle of the night. For
sure.
Which, you know...
Who work outside the spectrum of pedos and cucks.
Yeah.
Who are a different beast altogether. Yeah.
There's no vulnerability there to speak to cuckness, nor is there a pedo aggression. There's just a,
oddness. It's like a misnote. So, I would argue, in a sort of piano metaphor, a pedo is a note where you've smacked it hard. Bow. A cup note is just gentle boo, and then a stinky note is just it's out of tune. You hit it and it just hits a twang that's just on a different. It sounds just out of tune.
Yeah, it's an F sharp note in a otherwise C major song.
It's quite hard to explain. Yeah, exactly. It's quite hard to explain the categories, and it seems almost it is. You understand the more you get into it that it's the worst way of trying to explain it. The best way to explain it is examples of celebrities. So we kind of put together some people who kind of are classic of each of the categories. I think we for example, a classic pedo is Donald Trump. He is stinky, but he's incredibly pedo that it overrides his stinkiness, and he's just a classic pedo. Yeah?
Yeah. Big, bold pedo. No doubt in my mind, Trump's a pedo. But please be aware, when we call them a pedo, we're not suggesting that they have sex with or are even attracted to children. Otherwise, they wouldn't be calling my good friend Horatio a pedo to his face.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of get your mind out the gutter and try and focus on the science. Robert Downey Jr. you said was a classic pedo.
Yeah, You can. I don't know him well myself, but you can just imagine.
But certainly his persona, Iron Man, Tony Stark, definitely a pedo. Comedian, I think Bill Burr's pretty pedo.
Bill Burr's
his attitude,
quite a pedo. Margaret Thatcher,
but as you said, Margaret Thatcher, she's a pedo. Sarah Silverman, pedo. Angela Merkel, pedo. Oprah, pedo. A little bit stinky, but a pedo. Joan Rivers, pedo. I mean, when she's a pedo, definitely. Yeah, she's pure pedo. Henry VIII is pedo, but near the end of his life turned very, very stinky. But still, it was embodied with such a strong vein of being a pedo that it overrided his stinkiness. And that's the kind of a key point as well, is that you can be any of the all three. Like, I have a bit of cuck in me, I have a little bit of stinky in me, but I'm so overridingly pedo. That's my essence. So
everyone should. Yeah. I was just going to say everyone should have one of the three should stick out above the rest, which gives you your actual definition. Cucks. Michael Cera. He's the. Can you think of a bigger cuck?
I can't, Sam.
Paul Rudd. Not quite as much of a cuck as Michael Cera, but clearly a cuck. Justin Trudeau. Myself, I'm a cuck. Always have been. I used to be
you've always been a cuck.
I am now.
So that really explains. And most of the people you hang out with are cucks as well. You feel most comfortable around cucks.
Woody Allen, big cuck, and again, in a good example of a potentially actual paedophile. Of course, not being a pedo, because very few pedos are pedos.
So, like with paedophiles, to be a paedophile, you're normally either stinky or a cuck, because often you're quite insecure recluses who prey on the vulnerable, and that's quite because they can. You're probably stinky because it's a very stinky thing to do, to be that much of an outsider. So pedos are actually the least paedophilic of the three categories.
One very interesting example, which I've not discussed with you, Horatio, but I'm sure you'll attest to its value. Jeffrey Epstein, one of incredibly interesting, because of course he's one of the few pedophiles
he's a pedo.
Who is a huge pedo.
That's a great example. But but it's not. There's some. Well, I guess there probably is. Depending, I guess the common view of pedophiles is sort of strange, sweaty little fellas living in their mum's basements. Odd little creatures. But if you follow the conspiracy theories, there's probably more pedos than we think. There's probably more kind of like Bill Clinton's a pedo. Like everyone who's in the upper echelons of power, if you read the right websites, they imply that they're all systematically abusing children sexually. And I think to get in that upper echelon, most of them are pedophiles. Pedos. Do you want to talk about Stinky?
Stinky,
Stinky examples of celebrities that are stinky.
Like we say, is the hardest to get your head around, but we got some good examples here. Pete Doherty, very stinky.
Doug
Stanhope, the comedian. If you know him. Sorry. So yeah, you may notice Pete Doherty and Doug Stanhope, people who you could probably imagine smelling bad. So don't get too caught up with stinky people smelling bad. But if you look at someone,
cul-de-sac.
If you look at someone and think, I can imagine them reeking, then you're probably somewhere on the road to stink.
But that's not why they're stinky. But it's not why it seems to be. It's a key byproduct of being stinky.
So correlation is not causation. I say this over and over again. Billie Eilish, stinky.
Interesting example. Yeah, she's stinky.
Joe Wilkinson,
but Billie Eilish probably doesn't smell. Billie Eilish probably. Go on.
Yeah, no, that's why if you focus too much on the rules, if you focus too much on the early definitions, you don't you need to really feel pedo cuck stinky. If you try and do it through a checklist, you're going to slip up. I don't think Billie Eilish smells, but I know Billie Eilish is stinky. I do hope you're getting this.
Yeah, it's a huge... because this is probably one of the biggest audiences you've had to play to. And this is the way... we were in Edinburgh, we came up with this, and in our flat there was a comedian called Luke Chilton, very funny comedian, and we realised in our flat that it was basically made up of all cucks and pedos, but there was one stinky, and he was the stinky. And telling him he was a stinky, he got incredibly upset, which was incredibly wonderful for us, because being able to make someone so upset because they know the truth about themselves through a system as ridiculous as pedo, cuck, stinky, trifecta was I can't even explain, quite a profound feeling of joy. But what's interesting is how when you tell people what they are, stinky seems to be the one that is most upsetting to hear. But there a lot of the great people have been stinky. None of them are necessarily bad. Salvador Dali, stinky, genius. Frida Kahlo, definitely stinky. I mean, she's got quite stinky art, but her monobrow is incredibly stinky. It's quite hard to miss that. Like, her chosen monobrow is such a stinky move. And then you said Timothy Spall, so stinky. Oh my God, so stinky. So stinky. What a ridiculous stinky little fella. And then you had a great one, which was Jay Leno.
Jay Leno, yeah. He kind of, in some ways, can flutter between cuck and pedo in some scenarios. But overall, you just see him and you just go, he's stinky. So this is a stinky man.
But once again, probably doesn't smell that bad. He probably has got smells of cologne, but his face is so like a wacky racer that it just immediately makes him an oddball. An interesting one. So once again, these aren't all just people who are face down in gutters mumbling to themselves. They're in high society. They're among us. An interesting one is Hagrid, who looks stinky. If you saw Hagrid, so we can. This applies to fictional characters as well. If you saw Hagrid coming towards you, you would.
You'd be well within your rights to be like, I'd put money on the fact that this boy's stinky.
Yeah, he's a stinky man, 100%. But then his personality is actually a cuck, and that's the key thing. It's not how you present yourself or how you look; it's your essence is what's key. So it's probably a stinky cuck. He probably is a bit stinky, but he's undeniably and inherently a cuck. We've also found interesting dynamics between sort of three people who are pedo, cuck, and stinky seem to make some of the most successful kind of dynamics we see. Like the Ricky Gervais show, which is one of my favourite podcasts. It's a great podcast. That dynamic is driven by the pedo, cuck, stinky trifecta. Ricky Gervais,
pedo.
Stephen Merchant.
Quite stinky, but a cuck through and through.
Yeah, cuck. I'd never be a cuck. And Carl Pilkington is very obviously stinky.
Very stinky boy.
And Lord of the Rings, Legolas, Gimli, Aragorn,
Legolas,
Cuck,
Gimli, Stinky, Aragorn, Pedo. Easy.
Pedo, yeah. Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson, Pedo, Richard the Hamster Hammond, such a cuck. Richard the Hamster Hammond, such a cuck. And then James May, yeah, stinky as fuck. Stinky. Though he's quite cucky, but
if when Horatio said James May, something in you said, "Oh, he's stinky," then you're on the road to getting there. Someone who really understands Pedo, Cuck, Stinky, they'll hear the name James May, and they'll just you just feel it inside of you.
Yeah, but also it's worth remembering that he is also probably has some quite cucky qualities as well. Okay, and now it's time. We're going to move on to some questions from a friend of ours, another great comedian, Harry Monahan, who is a big fan of the Pedo, Cuck, Stinky trifecta, and we'll sort of round off today's podcast with some questions. So we're going to go to first question by Harry Monahan.
Hey guys, Harry here. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you for teaching me about Pedo, Cuck, Smelly. It's really changed the way that I look at the world. Actually, it's nice to be able to group people in very particular classes, because I think we're moving away from that as a society at the moment, which is good, but it's good to have a little backup in here so we know who's who. I do, though, have a couple of questions, and I think maybe they represent a lot of people who are new to the PCS, as I like to call it. So it could help clear some things up a bit. First one, it's a classic. Do you have to be smelly, to be classified as smelly?
All right, so first off, he's got it wrong. It's stinky, not smelly. I mean, it was a bit rude that he sent in a question and he managed to get one of the, not even misunderstanding the categories, but even the name of the category wrong. But we'll take your question anyway, Harry. So I'll ask it to you. Well, we've already talked about this. We already discussed this. So we'll probably just move on, actually.
This is a good question. What is the best one and what is the worst one to be? I'd like to hear your input on that, because I think being called smelly feels bad. Being called a pedo isn't great, but I think in your heart, if you know you're not a pedo, it's not that bad. Although, no one wants to be called a pedo at the end of the day. Being a cuck also feels like an insult. They all feel like insults. So I'm wondering if you have a best or worst one.
So best one or worst one to be? Well, this I think I understand why you might want to ask this as a question, but it's sort of fundamentally misunderstanding the trifecta. They all are framed as insults, but it's not necessarily. There's good in all and bad in all. Like, arguably, the people who have affected the most good change are pedos, but the people who have brought the most misery in the world are also pedos.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, it's handy
so, like,
that they're all unpleasant names, because they all sound bad at first. But really, people might have different opinions. Horatio, being a huge pedo himself, can't get enough of other pedos.
I love it. I love
to his detriment. But but you shouldn't. If someone is so stinky or so much of a pedo or such an insufferable cuck that it's unbearable, then obviously that's bad. But there's no best and there's no worst, and you shouldn't.
But I understand that people, but what I've noticed is when you tell a pedo they're a pedo, they seem happy. When you tell a cuck they're a cuck, they accept it but are not mad about it. And when you tell a stinky they're stinky, they are often in a state of denial, is what I've noticed.
Yeah.
But as well, so like Hitler was a pedo. Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King were also probably pedos. You know.
Yeah.
So it's just it doesn't quite work like that. But it's about taste. Like Sam likes hanging out with cucks. I like hanging out with pedos in general.
And yet somehow we make it work.
Okay, I think that's a good place to stop. I think we've definitely there's definitely enough to work with there. Do you have any closing statements? Seeing as I think this will put people off, both of us, for a long time, but the people who are into it are going to be more of the demographic we look to appreciate. And also, if you didn't like this video, I completely understand. I'm going to go back to regular programming tomorrow, but I needed to get this out so it exists. I hope you understand that. This isn't like a topical thing. This isn't our views on the coronavirus. This is storing away a time capsule. So in thousands, hundreds, maybe millions of years, when species find this, they'll have a better understanding of humanity. Is there any way people watching this can find you, Sam?
You can follow me on Twitter. It's pretty much
I didn't think so.
Do. At Sam_.
Oh, I lost connection.
But yeah, most of all, I'd say just, when you see a flatmate or when you're watching a show on TV or something, just have a think to yourself: is that a pedo? Am I watching a couple of stinky people? And you might, maybe this has all gone over your head. Maybe you think we're just talking nonsense. But if you just sit in it for a couple of days, then you might find yourself getting a lot out of the trifecta.
Yeah, great. Thank you for coming on, Sam. We'll leave by saying, everyone who's watching this at this point, please, and this is to everyone, we beg you do this, write a celebrity or a fictional character, anyone's name, in the comments, and this is a promise that either me or Sam will answer all of them. Every single one. So just post, don't say anything about them, just post their name, and we'll just post if they're pedo, cuck, or stinky cuck, stinky pedos, etc. I think that's it. Thanks for coming, Sam, and see you guys tomorrow.